Morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Robert McNamara. I'm a senior attorney at the Institute for Justice. I'm joined today by my colleague Dan Albin, also an attorney at the Institute, and by Charlie and Cindy Birnbaum, who own the home you see right behind us. The Institute for Justice, for almost 20 years, has been at the forefront of the fight against eminent domain abuse, the fight against the use of public power for private gain.
Thank you for coming. First of all, I want to thank the IJ for giving me the opportunity to have a voice to say that this house. I'm trying to get the apartment ready for rental, but I don't know legally if I'm actually able to bring a tenant in while the case is going through appeal. This whole business started in 2012 when I found out in the paper they made a tourism zone, they're going to take property, and the actual legal first court date was May of 2014. They built up all these casinos. This is what was the Revel, has been in bankruptcy for almost 2 years. The Showboat,
I think it's no secret that Atlantic City has been in dire straits for years, and I can't imagine anyone looking at Atlantic City and thinking that the one thing we need to do to turn things around is knock down one of the functioning buildings we have left.
this building is a big part of the history of the inlet of Atlantic City, where there's hardly anything left. So, I think this building represents an era, the heyday of Atlantic City. I never would have believed that they would consider taking this property first when they had all this vacant land. It just made no sense to me whatsoever. So you had all this vacant land, and they tore down the houses that occupied to the corner.
You rarely meet people who have this kind of deep, emotional, personal connection to a building, to a home, to a piece of property. That's almost hard to understand if you've never sat in the living room with him.
Here's the house in 1969. My dad and I had come to Atlantic City, kind of looking for possibilities of making a change in our life, because the previous year, 1968, was very traumatic. Tremendous trauma for myself, for my parents, just very, very earth-shattering for my family. This was my parents' home, and it was the first time in this country where they could say, we have a place. We actually own something in this country. It was a huge, huge moment for our entire family.
When I grew up, I always heard his voice the way it was, so I just assumed that that's just his voice. So I was kind of shocked when I learned he had a different voice. So I can't even picture my dad with a different voice. It would be weird, probably. And then I have a picture here of my dad and I. It's really the whole family. That house is a sanctuary for him, where some people might take up yoga or meditation. My dad goes to 311 Oriental Avenue. That is his meditation. That is his Zen. That's his spot.
My dad used the house more as therapy. The house is very, very special to him. And until he's ready to part with it, that's going to be his decision and also my mom's.
I like this color. This is, it's called Lyndhurst green. It's funny about colors. They're very much like music. They make you feel certain ways, you know. Okay. When we came to this country in 1952, my father, who was trying to make a living, he opened up a little jewelry store in San Francisco. And one of the things he did was he put a piano in the back of the jewelry store. And instead of being out front waiting for his customers, my father was in the back, usually helping my brother, encouraging him and listening to him practice, and very much involved with the music. I myself, you know, you try to copy your siblings. Because my brother got so good, he was able to get a scholarship to the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia. So the whole family moves from San Francisco to Philadelphia in 1957. And my mother's depression had lifted for a long stretch, a number of years, but it was a depression that was built upon the trauma of which he had suffered in Poland. All I can tell people is, unless you walk in a person's shoes, don't just say get over it. And if you can get over it easily, more power to you. But some people can't. That scarring is forever. All done. Give me a nosy. Give me a nosy. So I was born in 1947 in an American barracks called Neuholm, Germany, which is about 100 miles from Munich. Okay, let's see it bounce. Bounce.
Hey. Hi.
I think my mother and father-in-law were so traumatized by the war that they didn't want to bring up the subject.
Hey, I got it. Hey, that's not fair.
And it wasn't until Charlie and I went to Germany the summer of '72 to visit his uncle, and I saw Charlie's face go white, and I knew something was said to him that really upset him.
My parents never talked about that. They both had been married, and when the war broke out, and when the Nazis marched into Poland and started rounding up the Jews, My father, who was married to his first wife was killed. His parents were killed. My mother, her first husband was killed. Her daughter was murdered. They wound up being in the forests of Poland, joining up with the partisans.
My mother-in-law really enjoyed my company. I think I was the first woman to be in her life in a long time because she stayed very much by herself. She was very isolated. So when they moved to Atlantic City, to this building, she did open up to me about their history. My father-in-law and she both met in the forest, and he was like a partisan fighter. So they were always running, or they were living in holes that they dug to hide their campfires. It was towards the end of the war when she got pregnant with Charlie's brother. And of course it wasn't good to have a baby in the forest. What they were doing were killing the babies because the crying would give away their hideout. But the Russians had come in and freed the people there.
My father was born in the forest, which is crazy to imagine. The idea not just that he was born in the forest, that my grandmother was pregnant with him in the forest while they were in hiding. He suffered a lot and it was majorly impactful. So I don't know if it's PTSD and the genetics, but the fact he had such an insane, intense life, I think that was definitely a big impact.
I would throw out the idea that perhaps for my brother, that his situation started in the womb. Because after my experience, you would have hoped he would have learned. So I think the trauma is like a ripple. And that ripple continues whether we know it or not. My brother emigrated to Australia. 2 wonderful children, wonderful wife.
When he was around 23, he moved to Australia to visit an uncle who had survived the war and had gone to Australia. And while in Australia, he met my mother, and he ended up staying, marrying my mother and staying in Australia. And I think that he had a lot of stress and pressure in the US, given his parents and the challenges here. And I think there was some freedom. He was a new life. I don't think it was intended. They were very loving people, but you know, the constant pressure of their children to be successful, you know, would help them deal with their own pressures and stress and history.
The things that were lost along the way in those early years. The chance for a lot of socialization, social outlets, developing network of friends and different friendships. That didn't exist in our family. Everything took a back seat. The kids had to study. You have to practice. The person that set the standard as far as the music was my teacher. It's something that I had always sensed both from my parents and from him, the pain of what life had thrown at them. Because my teacher had survived 7 concentration camps from the Nazis. You use your technique for musical purpose.
Oh yeah.
How many people have you seen around you? They show off their technique and there's no music.
I know. Yeah.
And to me, your best technique, and your technique gets better the more clear you are about what you're trying to say musically.
Yeah.
And you have always a total sense of what you're going to say. In March of 1968, no warning for me, no preparation, just a very sudden, almost like a revelation of basically saying, you know, you will never be able to function as a human being in life. You don't have the skills to deal with people. Anyone that ever knew me to that point always saw a smiling guy. Someone that had accomplished a lot. I was a semester shy of graduating Temple University College of Music. Semester away, very quickly. So those few days that I was in this state, really almost speechless. My parents were terrified. They got me Temple University psychiatric department, and my parents did their part. Then once there, the staff or whatever, they put me in a room with a roommate who had all the shaving stuff in the bathroom. And in short order, I hard to explain, but I didn't just make an attempt at my life, because as a serious pianist, you learn how to be a perfectionist. The fact that it happened in the hospital is the only reason that I'm alive. When I was released from the hospital, my dad and I took that ride to Atlantic City. The decision was made to get this building. This was our new beginning.
Well, traditionally, the power of eminent domain could only be exercised for what's called a public use, for building a road or a school, taking property to be used by the government or by the public at large. But as far as the Casino Reinvestment Development Authority is concerned, they can use eminent domain for literally anything they can think of. The only justification they think they need to take your property is that they can imagine doing something better with it, or having some other private person do something better with it than whatever you're doing with it right now.
This house has been my place where I've been able to, first of all, reflect and think only good things about the life of my parents. And it's allowed me to do my job. I'm a piano tuner in Atlantic City. I've been able to do my job more efficiently over the years, because I've had a base of operations to service many, many casinos and do it well. This is Tony Bennett's CD with all these artists, and this is his autograph to me from Tony Bennett. I'm very proud of this. That's from Liza Minnelli. Bon Jovi did a concert at a Borgata.
This is Charlie right here. He's the most famous piano tuner in all the world. Charlie Tuna, right here. Charlie Tuna, ladies and gentlemen.
I didn't pay him anything to say that. So Eddie wasn't sure if they're using this tomorrow or not.
Well, it's not bad to tune it up so it doesn't hurt.
It's ready. It's ready to go. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, it's good.
How have you been?
I'm good. I'm good.
Excellent.
Yeah, everything's been going well.
I've learned when there's a deep tragedy, the worst thing you can do is to stand still and do nothing and just be paralyzed. When I got word of my brother's suicide, I was in Atlantic City. I came to the house. I went down to the basement and I swept the concrete basement for an hour. So for me, doing something physically to keep moving is my way of fighting back.
I've never had any resentment as to what happened to my father. I'm conscious of all that he'd been through and how complex life is in general, especially what his own experiences. For me to judge him in a sense as to what happened, I feel is just unfair. I do think the house is yet another, connection, not just to his parents and our history, but also to his brother. The times I spent practicing piano there, the tens and hundreds of hours. I think, that he'll never forget that, and I think that being there, it does give him a sense of just, as I said earlier, a sense of comfort, a sense of optimism.
My dad deals with his emotions kind of head on, and I know that right after the tragedy happened, my dad was cleaning the area and things like that, and the thought of seeing blood, and I could not do that. There is no way. So I had, for many years, I couldn't really go to that apartment.
My dad, he said, Dave, come to the house. Come to the house. Everything's fine. If I can go in, you can go in.
This house has given us options in life. When my mother was facing going to a nursing home, because we had a house, we had a choice, and she was able to stay in her home for 10 years with the help of a wonderful caregiver. The physical work of almost touching every square inch of every apartment. This is the work I did to move my mother down from the second floor I had to get that first floor ready and acceptable. She was getting older and weaker, so we did find a companion for my mother. Her name was Beatrice Cabarrus, a lovely Virginia lady. But then after a very serious medical situation, she broke her hip. And with the hip and her depression, she really she didn't want to live. And the doctors told me at the hospital, you know, Mr. Birnbaum, your mother will never be able to come back home again. It's because she's not eating. And the only alternative is having a stomach tube. So I said, well, that may be the case, but let's plan that you'll be leaving here in a month. And they looked at me like I was crazy, like I was nuts. It was one day I fed her lunch, November 19th.
So I just started bowling. I was in 8th grade, and I called my dad. And I told him to come pick me up when he can. So he ended up leaving early, and he brought me back home. The phone rang. I picked up the phone.
It was a call from the nurse that lived on the 2nd floor of this building.
She said, David, where's your dad? Where's your dad?
And in a panicky voice said that something has happened. Something has happened to your mother, she said to Charles. And you have to get down here right away.
I knew that my dad did purchase a piano from a casino that he placed in that apartment, and he would find a lot of peace playing that instrument. Maybe he was playing for my grandmother in heaven, you know, and maybe he could feel her watching her son. This was very, very traumatic experience for any son to deal with for a mother. And having the family has been through so much, and then you just add something this tragic on top. It's very strange.
Charlie himself is unique. Charlie is one of the greatest people I've ever met. It is one of the privileges of my life to represent Charlie Birnbaum. But Charlie's situation is not unique. All across the country, we see eminent domain abuse projects exactly like this, driven by Bureaucrats are driven by private developers who have a vision of a world they could make if only we are willing to hand them unlimited power to ride roughshod over small private property owners who don't have political power. That is an endemic problem in the United States, and it will continue to be an endemic problem until the courts step in and start to impose real limits on the use of eminent domain for private development like this. My constant hope is that Creta is going to come to its senses and leave Charlie alone. They have no plan to do anything with his property. They have no need for his property. They never have. I don't know what it is, but there has to be a better use of public money than spending money trying to destroy the Birnbaum family home.
So, a nice fresh, I can't undo what I had done, but if living a decent life was the best that I could give to both my parents and to my brother, I think it's something that I'll be able to look back on and say, you had things to do and you didn't blow your chance. I still have all my tools and paints and stuff. It'll be nice once it's cleaned up. So.
I love this one. It's nice.
And along the way, living, having family, having a wonderful wife, having children and grandchildren, I'm blessed a million times over. And when I have my private time and can enjoy an insight and can enjoy making music, I feel everyone's with me. I don't feel my teachers looking down harshly. Charlie, you made a mistake. And no, I didn't have a concert career. But I know he was joyful for me that I was living. So, what time I could still spend and reflect in this property is going to be cherished.